to Mindcrime Liberty Show with me, Swifton Dobson, and him, Tim Patton. Today we're joined by Rick Story to discuss, is arranged marriage defensible? Now, why do we bother talking about this topic? Well, the obvious fact seems to be that marriages don't seem to be in the best way these days. So for instance, in the UK, 33% of marriages will end in divorce. In America, it's 50%. And just the general sort of social fabric. I mean, you have a lot more of out of marriage births, etc., which is kind of related to marriage in certain respects. And the relationship between sort of men and women as such in this context doesn't seem to be as harmonious as it has been historically. Now, whether that argument historically is untrue and that it was worse than is claimed is another question. But nevertheless, it does at least seem obvious that things could at least be better than they are at present. So the question arises, could arranged marriage solve some of these problems? We have a different society today. We're a lot more mobile, and parents have significantly less impact on their children's marriages than they did historically. And the question is this all for the good, or was more parental involvement actually going to be, or going back to something more like that, be a better way of doing things? So we thought, well, let's get Rick back on, and because he'll have some good thoughts on this. So the first topic, though, I mean, to go in before we think, whether arranged marriage is a good idea or exactly what it constitutes, is firstly what actually is a good marriage. Now, of course, we could go at great length as to what constitutes a good marriage, but just in general, we want to have a general idea as to what would constitute a good marriage. Otherwise, we don't know what end we're attempting to achieve. So, Rick, so bare bones, what would you class as a sort of like a generally good marriage?
It's a difficult one, isn't it? Because, of course, every marriage is going to be a bit different. We all have, our own idiosyncrasies, and we can all be a bit different. And, of course, I am myself married, so there's a lot of pressure there. Do I myself have a good marriage? I think, yes, I do have a good marriage. Other people will, I'm very pleased to say, comment to say that it seems as though my wife and I love each other very much, and we seem to get on very well. We laugh together a lot, and our children seem to be happy. Now, I think in those comments that we receive, that sort of feedback that people clearly think is worth giving to us. They think it's going to be pleasing to us to hear that, and it's going to make us feel as though we've had some sort of success in our marriage. Those points that they're raising there, that we seem to be happy, the children seem to be happy. I think it's a good marriage is one within which, assuming that you are indeed able to have children, I do feel for those couples who want to have children but are unable to do so. I think it's a marriage where it facilitates the creation of a family, one that is healthy and happy, one that is, content, and there is strength within the family. There's solidarity. There's a shared culture just within the family itself. There are values that are shared. So it's a place which cultivates well-adjusted, healthy, happy citizens, if you want to put it that way. What I mean by that is that people with whom your own children will have to then engage with in the world in the future. So I think, yes, that necessity there, that yes, you're raising good, well-adjusted, happy, healthy people into the world that is to be shared by everyone, and with whom your own children must engage with in the future. I think that's the bare bones of it. I'm not sure what else I would add to that. I think adding anything else to it is just an extra. It's a bonus. But I think that is that's typically what people would identify as a successful or a good marriage. I don't know whether you share my thoughts on that, whether you two would agree or disagree.
I think that's largely true. I mean, the only thing I would add, primarily, or a couple of more things. A decent material standard of living, although as to what level that's going to be is another question, because finances create strains on marriages, etc., and also cause problems for raising of children in certain respects as well. So a decent material standard of living now, as to how high that should be, is another question. I'd also think that in general, marriage is kind of a good one if it lasts until either party die. I mean, that would seem to be, generally speaking, we don't have the idea that marriages are kind of good. Well, they're good like 10-year arrangements, and then, contract's over. Let's go to a new provider. People tend not to have that view. I mean, some people might, but I don't think it's a stretch to say that in principle we go, when you get married, you kind of stay married. And so one marker of it being a good one is it kind of lasts until either party die. I think that would be a reasonable. So obviously, like, if divorce takes place, it kind of almost by definition is failed, and therefore is a bad marriage in certain respects. Now, that's not to say that divorce can be permissible under certain circumstances, the best thing, but it's clearly not ideal. That's the main point I would say there. Tim, have you have anything to add here at all?
No, I don't.
All good? Excellent. Right, so I think we're both all on the same page on what that is. So then the question is, well, how do we achieve a good marriage? And this in particular is, what I'm focusing on is how to find like a spouse. And so it seems to me that there are 4 broad options we can have. We can basically just have that individual choice where both parties, there's no real parental involvement, and you want to marry them, you marry them, fine. That's it. It's completely left down to individual choice. I mean, that's pretty much what we have today, at least in Western Europe and the USA, where both parties, they might hook up or date or whatever, meet at university or colleges, etc., and they decide they like each other, so they marry each other. Other options would seem to be parental veto as one. So you could argue this is a form of arranged marriage in a sense, and this is more of a traditional sort of Western European one. The custom of asking a father to marry his daughter would be an example of this. I mean, that's done as a formality today. I don't know of any that have been blocked on the basis that dad said no. But you could call that a form of sort of arranged marriage, although a very much like a soft form, really. Then I suppose more towards what you might traditionally think of arranged, and I think this takes place more in sort of like Indian cultures and probably Africa as well, where you could have something like a parental shortlist. Typically for the daughter, we have pre-vetted these like 5 guys. Any of these 5 are okay in our eyes. Choose who you want, or something along those lines, whereby it's not veto. It's no. Here's a list. You can work with this. And then, of course, you could have forced marriage, which I think is what a lot of the time people think of arranged marriages. It's like, yeah, you have to marry them. Don't want it? No, you do. Which, again, you could say is a form of arranged marriage. Of course, it kind of is. But does seem to be at least clearly distinct from the previous 3. Because, again, typically the daughter would at least have the right to refuse marriage to a particular man in any of the 3 previous scenarios. So I think those are the 4 major options. And no, as well, this need not necessarily be legal in sense. I suppose it would in the sense of forced, but these don't necessarily. We don't necessarily have to be talking here about what the law should say, but just if we could have a society with a strong cultural norm for any of these 4, which one would be preferable and why. So, Rick, I've outlined some general approaches to sort of organizing who one marries. Do you have any thoughts on which of these would be better or worse, or more useful for today or in the past, or anything on those lines?
Well, I think that the last one that you've outlined there, where you have a forced marriage, I think you're right, Susan, that a lot of the time when people think of an arranged marriage, as you've said, Western European countries, or in the United States, that they tend to think of that situation. But and I've had friends from Saudi Arabia. I've had students. I've known a lot of people from Saudi Arabia, and they have different customs depending on what tribe they're in. But it seems to be the case that it is rarer, and it tends to be a practice that is increasingly becoming outdated, that you will have these forced marriages, or I did hear one story where a daughter was basically traded in for a car, which we might laugh at first, but when you realize that that's really what's happened, that is really quite a sad situation. I think, given the Christian background of still many of the moral underpinnings for Westerners, we would see, treating someone like an object to be sold like that as being something a bit repugnant. But most of the time, the situation is in the more conservative, very religious countries like Saudi Arabia, the third option that you're presenting there, Swithin, which is a kind of positive arrangement made by the family, where they will present a list of several people that they think are appropriate. Of course, there's the veto, the kind of negative parental arrangement that you suggested as well. That may still be the case, I think, even in some Western families as well, that you have a situation like that. But let's look at like the positive arrangement, something that you might more typically see in Arab countries, in the Middle East, or India. I think where people think of arranged marriages, it's a bit of a stereotype, of course, but people tend to think of India as well. If you just Google arranged marriages, a lot of these things will be frequently asked questions, and it will be aimed at clearly an Indian audience. So in a situation like that, what are the pros? What are the pros of your family presenting you with a list of people who you can marry, and they think are suitable? What are the pros for that? Well, I think obviously the first thing that a lot of young members of the audience listening now would realize is that you avoid the stress of having to find a partner, especially a suitable partner. It's seemingly becoming increasingly difficult to even have the hope of finding a suitable partner, let alone having a list of candidates before you and options available. It's difficult to have an environment where you can properly meet someone and have a conversation. People have to resort to dating apps and things like that, which is hardly a situation where you have people who know you very well, who love you, have your best interests, and know people who are similar to you. This leads me to some of the other pros for arranged marriage, which is that you have financial and your sort of social status security, as well as knowing that you will have a shared cultural and probably ethnic background with your spouse, therefore shared values, especially regarding parenting. Those things are much more of a given and the situation where you have your family, where cousins, many people may be involved in trying to find you a suitable spouse. Those are not small things. You said, Swithin, that you wanted to add to my list of things that make a successful marriage, a sense of financial security as well. That is much more of a given. It's something that makes the situation much more predictable for you when thinking about your future. But this is all very practical. These are sort of almost utilitarian considerations I'm bringing forward here. People might start to say, well, okay, but what about the more romantic side of things? We're talking about a relationship, after all, that is, may very well, ideally speaking, last you for the rest of your life. I think it's important to understand as well that, yes, in an arranged marriage, the decision is much more of a rational one. You might think it's less of an emotional one. Is that such a bad thing, though? Since ancient times, the thought of falling in love, even that word falling, it depicts that something's gone a bit wrong here. If you think of Cupid, for instance, Cupid's going around shooting people with arrows, and when people get hit by those arrows, they lose their minds. They lose a significant degree of their agency. They become infatuated with someone. And, of course, we know that this is what happens. When people fall in love, the part of their brain that deals with criticizing other people or making judgments about others, it gets switched off. And, especially if the two have had intercourse before they are married, well, as we know, sexual intercourse causes the release of hormones related to bonding, social bonding. So, actually, on the flip side of this, saying that having an arranged marriage, it's much more of a rational decision. Well, okay, you have people around you who genuinely care for you. You have family members aiding you in the decision. And so that helps to, of course, curtail any genuine confusion you might have about who's going to be a suitable partner when you're, looking for someone. But also, studies have shown that in arranged marriages, people typically end up just as in love as, people who have hooked up, or they've been dating, or, their friends played, matchmaker, and they got them together. And of course, that's because they've consummated the marriage, they've had intercourse, and the bonding hormones get released. And it's important to note here that these marriages, even the ones we're talking about, Saudi Arabia, that sort of thing, the woman can say no. She can say no. She can, a list is presented there. The potential groom's family come to the bride's home. The families meet each other. You see, well, do the families themselves gel? Maybe they do already. Maybe members of the family already know each other. That's how they were able to add this person to the shortlist. And also, the two are able to meet. They're able to look at each other, not covered up or anything like that. They're able to look at each other. Do they find each other physically attractive? They're able to talk, and they do talk quite candidly about the arrangement. They're having a very mature conversation about their intentions and their future together, and maybe even in a way that people who have just hooked up and let's just get married, maybe they're not having the same level of conversation in terms of maturity, in terms of thinking about children, in terms of planning for the future, basically. All right, so I mean, those are the pros that I can see. They're ones that have been noted time and time again in studies. What are the cons? What are the cons there? Well, inevitably we worry about, things like patriarchy and tyrannical fathers and this sort of thing. But, again, I mean, this is in, non-Western, non-Christian contexts. There are numerous opportunities for the potential bride to refuse. She can turn certain people down. So, I'm struggling to see the bad side of this, guys, to be honest with you. And look, I haven't had an arranged marriage myself. I don't want to be a hypocrite here. I met my wife. She's from a different cultural background. She's mixed ethnicity herself, and I'm one of these guys that I fell in love. I don't want to sound like a hypocrite here, but you look at the situation, especially if you look at the statistics just don't seem to lie. So when you said it's 50% the divorce rate in the US, well, arranged marriages within the US, the divorce rate is just below 4%. And that's pretty much the same as the global percentage of divorce rates for arranged marriages. And I should note that arranged marriages are the majority of marriages in the world. So you want to talk about a bad idea, it very much seems that what we do in the liberal West is a bad idea. And look what it's done to countries like South Korea or Japan, where before they would have had much more of this positive arranged marriage, the third option that you listed there, Swithin, where it was more of a familial or communal arrangement, the marriage. And we'll look at South Korea and Japan now. The young men find it so difficult to find a wife, they've almost given up. They're marrying their virtual waifus online, and the young ladies, well, they've bought the idea of this romance that they are destined to meet their fated match. They've taken this so much to heart that they have choice paralysis. They see different guys and they're like, well, I need some kind of sign that this one is my destined soulmate or something like that. And and they end up delaying and waiting for Mr. Right, whoever that's supposed to be, to come along. And they get older and the best men end up married away, and it becomes a bit of a nightmare. So yeah, I'm struggling to see the downside of the arranged marriages. I'm going to be honest with you. Maybe argue against me, please.
Well, I suppose, and the tyrannical father. I mean, the obvious one is one where the cultural norm is that the bride's family pay a dowry payment to. Oh, hang on, no. Where although this isn't always the case, there's a different way around, whereby the family of the groom pays money to the bride's family, and so basically the family just pick the richest possible men, so they get the biggest possible dowry to pay to the family. Now I know that's supposed to be a contingency fund for being if they get divorced, etc. But it does seem, at least historically, that may have happened, that they were just taken by the bride's father as an extra nice bit of cash to do what they please. So I mean that's of course the potential downside to a large extent. As you say, it means a much more rational decision. A lot of work done on marriage in America, and I can't remember who did it, but said basically relationships at work are ones where you kind of decided to get together, whereas a lot of them end up being sliding, and so you have this sort of sliding versus deciding. And the sliding ones are like, oh, we like to hook up, oh, have sex, oh, I move in. Those are the ones that do badly because they just sort of fall into stuff, like you're saying, falling in love, being shot by Cupid, and so that leads to somewhat irrational decision making, because it seems clear that if you think about it and step back from it, marriage is kind of an investment, and so actually treating it more like an investment is clearly can't, well, at least in the current context, be a particularly bad thing. So I suppose an argument might be against the an additional against the pre-vetted list is, well, the daughter may have met somebody else or spoken. Now, of course, this depends on the society and how much interaction the sexes have, because obviously in Islamic ones, they're pretty segregated to a large extent. But supposing it wasn't in that scenario and they met somebody else who kind of wasn't on the list, that then means, well, there could potentially be a better one that the daughter has found but isn't available because they're not on the list. So I suppose that's sort of, you kind of have a knowledge problem, to use sort of Hayekian sort of language here in the context of arranged marriage. That could certainly be a potential issue, which then leads me to a more practical concern, is that at least in the West today, because of people being hypermobile and people not living in the same areas, I mean, it's particularly particularly places where the kids go to university. If they don't, they tend to stay in relatively, I haven't seen any studies on this, but I would imagine that, and given my experience, that people who do not go to university will on average stay closer to their parents geographically than would people who went to university. I don't think that's hugely controversial. And obviously in that circumstance, then you just can't even produce an arranged marriage list. So I think that's going to create a very difficult problem, at least as sort of society is currently constituted in the West. Obviously not in Saudi Arabia or anything like that, but if we're trying to translate, I think that would be a major impediment. Tim?
Not to sound like a broken record, I brought this point up before, but one of the things is the idea of selection effects, which is, one example of that is Brian Kaplan's book, the case against higher education. But speaking of marriage, it seems like there's one interesting statistic, is the people who never got married. Now again, happiness statistics are kind of dubious, but people who never got married are better than the people, or quote unquote happier than the people who've been divorced. And I think that one of the things you could find is that the people who don't, one of the comments was made about Brexit was sometimes, the best thing to do is not to get married. Britain shouldn't have married itself to the European Union. So maybe there's a sort of incentivized, some people just aren't quote unquote cut out for it. There was no sort of harmonious relationships here. They're not of the marriage harmonious elect, so to speak. So I'm whether you could arrange things in such affairs, or you could arrange rules and laws to set up things, is a good question. But whether you can make everyone happy, I'm somewhat suspicious of that. That's my only comment here. Maybe the people who aren't, you brought up like the Japanese and South Korean instances, which seems to be the way you're trending. This could just be like in a sense, we had an episode earlier on. Swithin likes to point out that birth control might be one of the biggest technology. I actually agree with him that in a sense this is just now a sort of quote unquote fact, and people can do the act without it. People don't even need to do the act in a way with other people. And yeah, Slavoj Zizek entirely agrees with this, like that in a sense this is sort of like a Brave New World dystopia of sex. But I do think there are selection effects at work here. Maybe people don't get married because they don't want to. That'd be my point.
If I can cut in there, sorry, Swithin, but I think that's an interesting point, Tim, because yes, I mean, okay, people who haven't been married at all, they haven't had to suffer the enormous stress of a divorce, as well as, living with the knowledge of, in the back of your mind, always, what Swithin had said, by definition, you have a failed marriage. You may even have broken a family, to live with the guilt, if you want, of that on your mind, on your conscience. It's a sort of stain on your character, really. Whereas to never have been married, you've never had to undergo that. There's no burden on you in a sense, and so it seems obvious in a way. Yeah, and of course you would be happier than the person who has divorced. But of course, people who are married and have been married for a long time do seem to be happier. There are studies that say women are certainly happier when they're married and they have children. In terms of what makes that marriage successful, what keeps it going, we can only really look at the statistics. As we said, the arranged marriages, the stats for divorce are remarkably low. Is it surprising? I think when you think about it and you lay out all of the reasons why arranged marriages are successful, I don't see that it's surprising anymore. I don't know if there's any pushback there, but
I suppose I mean the obvious argument with the arranged marriage ones is that there's such a strong cultural taboo on divorce that those marriages that otherwise would have been ended in the modern West aren't ended there. So you have a skewing of those. But then the question is it really? Well, I say the Americans at 46% to 4%. I mean, is it really that much? Does that explain everything? I think that's unlikely. But if you want to be someone to defend the general status quo in the West, I think that's the way I would go about trying to make the case. But I don't think you could. I don't think that would explain such a large effect size. But
I think that's a good counter argument, Swithin. Yeah, definitely, because okay, so you say it's the divorce rate for arranged marriages in America is 4%. Okay, but most of those marriages, I'm supposing, actually, I don't know if this is the case, but it would not be surprising, right, if we found out that most of those arranged marriages in America were immigrants from India, second, third generation, whatever it's going to be, even maybe first generation, or from somewhere else where the cultural custom is it's strong, and arranged marriage is a typical thing. I think that's a good point, Swithin. And also then, divorce being taboo in those cultures too. So I suppose it would be interesting then to see, would arranged marriages work in a Western context if they suddenly were to, for whatever reason, take off in popularity today. I think for all of the reasons that we've laid out, the predictability about things, the fact that the two may be from a similar ethnic, cultural background, probably going to have shared values, I think that it would still be pretty good. I think that the divorce rate would be low. I think people would tend to be happy. I think it would create, good families according to the definition that we're using here. But it would be interesting to see. I think probably the only groups who would go along with this would be, I want to say traditional Christians. I think that's probably the only group I could say. I'm not sure in terms of demographics, but definitely I think it would be traditional Christians in a Western context who would try this out, make this popular somehow, see would it work. I don't know whether it would ever gain the kind of popularity that it once had amongst, let's say, white people in the West. I'm not sure. But I think maybe it would be good. It would probably be good. I mean, the birth rates for ethnic Europeans in Western countries are dropping. I mean, maybe it would help with that situation. Certainly, I think it would help with the remarkably high divorce rate.
One argument to make is the phenomenon you're describing in the sense is already starting to exist, but just in a slightly dystopic way in the terms of dating apps and algorithms. You can take personality tests, and you can have this this sort of choice be brought in. Douglas Lane, who runs Zero Books podcast, sort of like a Marxist Left podcast, had an episode about this. He's recently divorced, and he had an episode on dating, and he's pointing out that there's something strangely commodified about dating apps insofar as you put in your traits and so forth, and outcomes results here. It's sort of like turns it into a you look for a car or look for tires or look for a house in the same way you look for it. Now again, as sort of a libertarian, I see no really a priori problem with that. I do think historically marriages served an economic function, and this idea of love is something new. You can just sort of have, from what I know about like European monarchies, is that like many of them didn't even sleep in the same bed. I think like in like 1900 of the European monarchies, I think only the Russian one actually, quote unquote, would actually have any love to each other. It was all sort of like a business relationship in that regard. So, there is it. I don't have any liberal like or left libertarian. I don't really like yuck toward the idea of it. I think it's perfectly reasonable proposition just to arrange something by some other affairs and just take the option that was given to you. I don't think there's anything against that. I'm not against people trying it at all. But the other bringing like your example about Saudi Arabia, I just don't really see any way to get there. I don't even know if we want to get there either. And they seem like they're increasingly going the liberal direction anyway. That's one comment there. So what would you make of like the idea of these sort of dating markets online? Are they a quote unquote arranged marriage? What would you make of that?
I mean, I think that they're a step in the right direction in the sense that they are trying to pair people. They're trying to see, are these people compatible? I just query, on what basis are they determining that they are compatible? Where you have an arranged marriage where families are involved, and obviously depending on the cultural background, these may be very wide family dynamics, but where cousins, second cousins even, may be getting involved in the decision, or in trying to arrive at a short list of candidates. In a situation like that, the marriage may be that much more stronger, not just because you're from the same cultural background, because you are both from Saudi, but you might be a part of the same tribe. You may have a much more local or regional history that you're sharing. What's more, you may end up marrying someone who is like a third cousin or something like that. And anyone who watches Professor Edward Dutton's show, The Jolly Heretic, will know that your third cousin is, genetically like the ideal person you're supposed to marry. It's you'll produce the healthiest offspring, or whatever, if you marry your third cousin. So things.
One quick comment though. One of the things I oftentimes, again, I'm not trying to be contrarian for the sake of it, although maybe I am. But one of the comments is that we don't have extended family networks, and actually the more upper, like if you get once you get to the middle class and upper middle class, you start having nuclear families. Anyway, so we don't have here in the West generally, we're all this since like at least the 1940s been nuclearized, which some people view as a decline, and actually I tend, well, in a sense, is decline. Like, I mean, I don't, I don't know how oftentimes I see my extended family. I mean, maybe that's true for places like quote unquote traditional societies, and actually that's true for the lower class people in the West, but it's not true for middle class and above, which is the ones that have the lowest birth rates by far.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, Tim. In the West, we don't have proper communities. We don't have all of these organic, layers of communities between us and the state that we used to. We used to have that in Europe, in which they, to a decreasing extent, sadly, they have in some other cultures around the world. They're coming more and more like us. We go from our home, where we very often hardly talk to our neighbours, to work, to a cafe, and back to home again. And all of these interactions are just, well, basically they're economic ones, maybe with some politeness and friendliness sort of coating all of that, but it's not real community. We don't have that. I mean, that's why I said, if there were a group in a Western context who would take this up again and have some chance of, making it a real cultural custom, it would be probably, I think, traditional Christians, because of course they'll be meeting each other at church. You may have people who know somebody else from another church, whatever that would be, a sister church, whatever it is, or a church they used to go to. And of course, it tends to be people who are more religious and of a conservative bent who have larger families in the first place. So, I think in terms of like a kind of tribalism coming about again, where there are clans and there's intermarriage between those clans, or within the tribe or whatever. I think it would probably just be within a traditional Christian context. I can't see which other group in the West would, well, it even has an institutional basis, or a community not based on purely economic factors, where and of course the incentive, the religious incentive to produce families. I can't see any other group in the West with any hope of establishing arranged marriage as a practice.
Tim, not Tim. Rick, given the way we are, though, what do you think we can do here and now, as it were, to improve the quality of marriage? I mean, the obvious example is with our children. Obviously, our children aren't particularly old yet. Well, I think your eldest is slightly old. No, I think mine's older than you. I can't remember. And you got one on the way. What can we do to help ensure that our children have relatively better matches than they otherwise would do? I mean, so for instance, a lot of this seems to revolve around parental involvement, and trying, because they seem to have more experience and more far-sighted way of looking at things. It tends to be the case that younger you are, to a large extent, you're somewhat short-sighted and just focus on looks and a very sort of actually, I don't know if it correlates over time, but sort of R and K stuff. So some sort of parental involvement seems to be ideal, but then the question is, well, how can that be achieved today, especially when people are more mobile? Do we have a situation whereby we attempt to encourage children to remain more geographically in more geographic similar areas to us or to family members, so that we can have sort of more input that way? and even if that's true, as you mentioned, the social bonds we have today are somewhat less. So the question is, would you even know anybody who you could marry? And then sort of a secondary point then, would then maybe the most practical option, at least at present, just be teaching children to treat marriage not as being shot by Cupid with an arrow, but rather a much more rational, to somewhat economic and social relationship than the general culture would indicate? Is that really the only real way we can go? I mean, it does seem to be the case as well that clearly people do need some guidance. I mean, at least. There's a particularly great Daily Mail headline, which is, quote, domestic violence survivor who fled two abusive partners only to marry a man who murdered his wife defends her choice because, quote, he had 20 years in prison to think about how to treat women better, unquote. Now, I'm pretty darn sure not the best chooser of men. Just going to put it out there. And it does seem to be the case. Now, maybe it's the case that just because women can get men more easily than men can get women, but there seems to be, especially with women, a lot of women can have a long string of very bad male boyfriends in a way that men don't seem to have as many bad girlfriends. Now, that could be selection. That could be just completely anecdotal, completely false. Either way, it seems to be the case that certain people have very bad instincts when it comes to marriage and dating. So some form of guidance seems to be necessary. So back to just the practicality, Rick. What would you think we should do? Just try and get kids not to move away so far so we can have a bit more of an idea of who they're going to marry and try and aid them with that? Or is it just going to be a case of, look, well, given the current economic situation, that's not really very likely. We just kind of have to train you to look at certain factors to help you make a better decision. I suppose as well you could throw in veto there as well, back to a very sort of soft arranged marriage possibility. So, Rick, what do you think about any of that?
Yeah, I mean, definitely. I mean, that example you gave, sort of, immediately you think, where's her dad? You're immediately thinking, where are the people in her life who love her and they're there to look after her? They're there to intervene, we do interventions, if someone's become addicted or something like that. We stage an intervention and everyone's there saying, oh, we all love you very much. Now, stop doing cocaine. Where are the people in her life? But especially you think, where's the dad? It's a joke, it's a cliche, isn't it? That the stripper clearly had a really bad father. That's that's a cliche, to the point, but it's a joke. Sort of, I agree with you, and I know your views of them because you're an advocate of homeschooling. And I've heard you talking about parenthood before and about the importance of creating marriable children, children who someone will see as being a real catch, and they'll be an admirable parent for their children. And I'm, as you know, I'm totally with you on that, and I think that's great. And a part of that, I'd say to them, let's, keep children close. When they go to, if they go to university, try to send them to the local university. Does it really matter? Does it really matter which university they go to? But in any case, I mean, do they have to go to university? Is it really worth it these days? I mean, would they be better off if they just learnt a trade and got some really good experience? Keep them close, keep them from making mistakes. Be ready, to take part in your child's life. But I think even with us saying that, you should be a part of your child's life. To say that shows that there's something really very wrong going on in our Western context, because, historically, the way people thought about family and then, clan and tribe and things like that is, we're a part of a story. We, in this current generation, we're a part of something that's, stretches right back into the past, and it's reaching forward, and, we're at the tip of that thing, and we're passing on the torch. We're continuing that process of furthering on the line, the race, whatever it is, however you want to refer to it. And we've lost that a little bit, and frankly,
how can we recover? That's true, but how practically can we do it? Is it possible in your situation in, I don't know, 15 years time to go for sort of conservative, sort of Saudi style arranged marriage, or are you going to have to do something else? I mean, keep them close, yeah, I'd agree that you have some involvement in that respect, but advocate some sort of veto system, or would that not even work, or would it? And what about, as I say, getting the kids to treat marriage more of an investment than more of something to just expect to happen?
Well, that's why I think religion is such a key part of it. It's another reason why I think probably traditional Christians would be the only ones capable of taking this up, because, to have that grander view, that more, what can I say, viewing the current generation and your ideas about what marriage is about, the purpose, the actual purpose in starting a family. Do you need to start a family? Why? Having an actual reason for starting a family. So much of that comes from your religion. And Christians obviously have that in spades. We're told to be fruitful. In so many ways, as traditional Christians, we would see that a woman becoming a mother is fulfilling, her highest calling, in a sense. The creation of life. I think having a religion there to guide, to instruct, is really key. Because it provides that perspective, it provides that sense of purpose. It's an encouragement there, and so long as the law is not quite like it is in Russia, where the father of the household is has a lot of authority, let's say, in the West, once they turn 18, you don't have a lot of authority over your child. You can advise, gently advise their decision making, but you do not have a great deal of authority unless there is the religious, cultural, customary backing, for the father to, let's say, to veto Swithin, or to provide a short list of candidates who are acceptable, to the family. Without that, I just don't see much hope for it taking off.
I can see that. I think if you have a sufficiently good relationship with your children, if you sort of say, like, you veto a candidate, now it depends what things you may sort of disassociate with them to a certain extent if they continue with it. That could hopefully at least concentrate minds, even if there's no sort of legal authority there. I do think a short list is just not practical in the Western society today. I just don't think parents would know nearly enough. I mean, maybe in the next 50, 70 years, maybe, but not currently. I think the only real practical thing would be a veto system. And because of that, because of the child needs to be more proactive than they may do, say, in traditional Saudi society. I think one of the crucial things is to inculcate in the children what a marriage is, what it's for, and then because of that, figure out what characteristics do you need to what kind you need to have. So I thought this a while. So briefly on my list, you want to look at religious background and your current compatibility, expectations of conjugal roles and career aspirations, number of children that you want to have, how should you raise children? That's a huge thing. Education of children, how should that take place? You want to know, where do they want to live? Do they live locally? You want to live abroad? Political views, you could say, is becoming more important now as things become somewhat more polarized than they have been historically. So you want to know that, and then you want to. So that's more sort of like cognitive stuff, and then just see how they are in general, what they like, what they don't like. This is more that you don't proper compatibility, but just so you know who they are and what they how compatible they're going to be. Childhood background and experience. If you see their parents are pretty messed up and the rest of the family are, that may not saying that you can't get a good kids out of bad families, but kind of not necessarily a good sign. You want to know you want to know whether they're like vegetarian or vegan. So you probably know that, but that could be kind of annoying in the future if they're vegan, especially. You want to know what their attitude to money is like. There's a whole host of different things that it's hard to remember all these. I'm just chucking out there that I think you really just want to nail down, and the kids to know, okay, these are kind of things you need to consider. And I think that, as far as we could take it, would be at least a way of avoiding as terrible matches as the Woman in the Daily Mail headline. Any final thoughts, Tim or Rick?
So I think we're basically concluding with, don't let your children marry a vegan, Swithin. I think that's the final thought. That's what
that would be true. Yeah. It co-correlates with other undesirable traits. That's not to say that all vegans are undesirable and unpleasant, but yes, it does. But apart from that, Rick, any final thoughts, or Tim?
No, just thanks very much for having me. It's always a pleasure to speak to you both.
Thanks for joining. Just now, I'd thank everyone for listening. If you've enjoyed this program, please share it with your friends and family, and subscribe to us on Podbean or on YouTube. The more subscribers we get, the higher we get in the search rankings, and the more people can access this material. And finally, if you'd like to contact the show for any reason at all, please contact us at mindcrime liberty show@gmail.com. That's mindcrime liberty show@gmail.com.